Chapter 1. When Trust Felt Like Safety. I trusted my husband with everything, my money, my name, my future, and one morning my bank told me I no longer existed on my own accounts. No warning, no fight, just silence and paperwork that erased me legally. I am Eleanor, and on this channel, I tell true style stories about quiet revenge, power, and what happens when trust is used as a weapon. This is how my marriage turned into a system designed to remove me, and how I took my life back without shouting. I used to believe that trust was the quiet foundation of a good marriage, not the dramatic kind that demands proof or reassurance, but the steady kind that lets you rest your mind at night. For more than 20 years, that belief shaped my life with Jonathan Whitmore in a quiet suburb of Connecticut, where every lawn looked trimmed on purpose and every conversation ended politely. We met in our late 20s, ambitious in different ways. Jonathan loved structure and numbers. I loved systems and people. I built my career in operations management, solving problems before they became emergencies. He climbed steadily in finance until he became a chief financial officer at a private logistics company. Together, we looked balanced, capable, safe. By the time our children were older, our life settled into a predictable rhythm. Morning routines, weekend dinners, holiday photos that always looked composed. From the outside, we fit the picture of an upper-middle-class American family that had figured things out. Inside, I felt proud of what we had built. In 2013, I made a decision that still feels important to name clearly. I chose to step away from my full-time role. No one pushed me. Jonathan did not demand it. Our children were entering a stage where schedules grew complex, and his job required frequent travel. I told myself that keeping the household steady was also a form of leadership. I had spent years managing operations for other people. Now I would manage the home. At first, nothing felt lost. I stayed sharp. I followed industry news. I helped friends with projects. Jonathan often told people that I was the reason everything worked smoothly. I believed him. That belief mattered to me. The shift began quietly, almost politely. Jonathan suggested that it would be easier if he handled all financial matters, since he was already immersed in numbers every day. He framed it as efficiency. One point of contact, fewer headaches. He said I had earned the right to not worry about statements and filings. I remember nodding as he spoke, thinking that this was what partnership looked like, trusting the person who had expertise, letting go of control not because you were incapable, but because you were secure. He started consolidating accounts. He explained tax strategies over dinner, speaking calmly, confidently. When I asked a question, he smiled and said that I did not need to carry that burden anymore. There was no cruelty in his tone, only reassurance. Still, I felt something shift, a small tightening in my chest when mail from the bank stopped arriving, a pause when I realized that I no longer knew our account balances by memory. Each time, I told myself I was overthinking. I reminded myself that I had chosen this role, that trust meant letting go. The first time his words landed differently was subtle enough that I almost missed it. We were reviewing paperwork at the dining table. I leaned over a document and asked why a particular account was being moved. Jonathan did not raise his voice. He did not snap. He simply said that I did not need to stress over details that were outside my expertise anymore. Outside my expertise. The phrase settled between us. I laughed it off. I told myself that he meant well, that he was protecting me from unnecessary worry. I signed where he pointed, my pen moving easily across the page. Later that night, lying awake, I wondered why that moment lingered. I had spent years trusted with million-dollar operational decisions. Now I was being gently guided away from financial ones inside my own home. I pushed the thought aside. Marriage required compromise. Marriage required faith. Over the next year, the pattern repeated. Jonathan would bring home documents related to trusts and authorizations. He explained them in broad strokes: family protection, long-term planning, estate efficiency. Each explanation sounded responsible, adult, mature. He asked me to sign a power of attorney related to financial matters. He said it was standard, a safeguard in case something happened to him or to me. I remember feeling a strange mix of pride and relief. Pride that he trusted me enough to share these plans, relief that someone else was taking charge. I signed without reading every line, not because I could not understand them, but because I believed that understanding was no longer required of me. Friends would sometimes comment on how calm I seemed, how lucky I was to not worry about money. I smiled and agreed. Inside, I told myself that peace was the reward for years of effort, that safety meant not needing to look too closely. Jonathan never demanded my silence. He earned it through consistency, through a tone that suggested care rather than control. When he said that everything was handled, I wanted to believe him. Trust felt like maturity, like proof that our marriage had evolved beyond suspicion. The family trust documents arrived one evening after dinner. He placed them neatly on the table, explained that this was the final step in organizing our future. I scanned the pages quickly. Legal language, formal structures, nothing alarming at a glance. He watched me with an expression I read as affection. When I hesitated, he reminded me that we had always been a team, that this was about stability for our children, for retirement, for peace. I signed. That night, I felt something close to relief, as if handing over control meant I could finally rest. I told myself that safety was built by trusting the right person, that marriage was not about keeping score. Looking back, I can see the moment for what it was. Not betrayal, not yet. It was the point where my sense of security became dependent on someone else holding the keys. I didn't know then that safety built on trust alone is fragile. I only knew that I loved my husband, believed in our life, and chose to see that choice as strength. If you have ever trusted someone because it felt like the right thing to do, stay with me. This story begins there. Chapter 2. The day my name disappeared. The morning it happened did not feel important. I remember standing in the kitchen, coffee cooling on the counter, mentally listing errands like I had done 1,000 times before. Grocery store, pharmacy, dry cleaning. The kind of ordinary day that feels invisible while you are living it. At the checkout line, I placed my card on the reader without thinking. The screen blinked once, then again. Declined. I tried a second time, slower, convinced it was a mistake. Declined. The cashier looked at me with polite confusion. I felt my face warm, that familiar reflex of embarrassment even when you have done nothing wrong. I apologized out of habit, stepped aside, pulled out another card. Same result. I paid with cash from my wallet and walked out carrying bags that suddenly felt heavier than they should have. In the car, I sat for a moment with the engine off, staring at the steering wheel as if it might explain what had just happened. At home, I opened my laptop and logged into our bank account. Or tried to. The password I had used for years no longer worked. I reset it, followed every prompt carefully. Access denied. My first thought was fraud, a system error, something temporary that would resolve itself with a phone call. I dialed the bank while unpacking groceries, balancing the phone between my shoulder and ear. The representative asked for verification. Name, date of birth, social security number. Then there was a pause, long enough that I stopped moving. According to our records, you are no longer an authorized signer on this account. The words did not land all at once. I asked her to repeat herself. She did, patiently, as if explaining something simple. My name had been removed. All primary and secondary accounts, all related investment access. I asked when this change was made. She gave me a date from 2 weeks earlier. I asked who authorized it. She said, "My husband." I hung up and stood in the kitchen, surrounded by food I no longer wanted. It was not the money that scared me in that moment. It was the realization that something fundamental had shifted without my knowledge, that decisions had been made in my absence. I called Jonathan, straight to voicemail. I texted, no reply. By evening, my phone was still silent. His location showed him out of state, somewhere he had not mentioned. I told myself he was busy, that this was another misunderstanding that would dissolve under explanation. The next day, the mortgage company called to confirm payment details. The day after that, an email arrived from an investment firm addressed only to Jonathan. Each interaction reinforced the same truth. I was no longer part of the structure that held our life together. When Jonathan returned 3 days later, he did not look rushed or defensive. He walked into the house calmly, set his bag down, kissed my cheek as if nothing had changed. We sat at the dining table, where we had signed so many papers before. I asked him directly what was happening. He folded his hands, took a breath, and spoke in the same measured tone he used at work. He said that he had made some adjustments, that the financial complexity had grown beyond what was healthy for me to manage, that he had noticed I seemed overwhelmed lately. I told him I had not felt overwhelmed. He nodded, as if acknowledging a misunderstanding. Then he said something that changed the temperature of the room. He said that sometimes people do not realize their limitations until someone else steps in. I felt something tighten in my chest. I asked him if he had removed my name from our accounts. He said yes. He said it was temporary, protective. He framed it as care, as foresight, as a husband doing what needed to be done. I asked why he had not told me. He said he did not want to worry me. That was the moment I understood that the ground had shifted beneath me, not violently, quietly. Rachel found us mid-conversation. She stood in the doorway, phone in hand, eyes flicking between us. Jonathan explained the situation before I could. He used the same words: protection, stability. He spoke about stress and balance. Rachel looked at me with concern. She asked if I had been feeling okay lately. The question stung more than the situation itself. I realized how easily a narrative takes shape when someone else controls the information. Evan stayed in his room. He did not ask questions. He did not take sides. His silence felt heavy. Later that night, I searched for documents, old files, emails, anything that might explain how my name could disappear so completely. What I found instead was confirmation. Trust documents filed, authorizations executed, all legally sound. A lawyer called the next morning. Not ours, hers. She spoke clearly and professionally, explaining that all changes had been made within the bounds of the law, that I had granted the authority myself. I listened without interrupting. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt something unfamiliar settle in. Not panic, not rage, clarity. I was not being robbed in secret. I was being removed in plain sight. Over the next week, Jonathan acted as if the crisis had passed. He reminded me I had no worries to focus on. He suggested I focus on rest, on hobbies, on the things I enjoyed now that I didn't have to worry about finances. Every sentence placed me further outside the structure of my own life. One evening, I packed a small suitcase. Not out of anger, out of necessity. I told Jonathan I needed space. He did not stop me. He looked relieved. Rachel watched silently as I closed the door. Evan did not come downstairs. I drove to a small apartment I had found in New Haven. It was modest, clean, temporary. I unpacked slowly, placing my clothes in drawers that did not yet feel like mine. I sat on the bed and let the quiet settle. I had lost access to money, to accounts, to the authority I once held without question, but I had not lost awareness. I understood now that trust had not failed because I was foolish. It had failed because it was used as a tool. As I lay awake that night, staring at a ceiling I did not recognize, I made a decision. I would not argue my way back into a system designed to exclude me. I would learn how it worked. Chapter 3: Silence as Strategy. Learning how it worked became my routine, not in dramatic leaps, but in small, disciplined hours that filled the quiet of my apartment in New Haven. I did not announce what I was doing. I did not warn anyone. Silence became the structure that held me upright. The apartment was plain and efficient. White walls, a narrow desk by the window. At night, the city hummed softly, a reminder that other lives were moving forward while mine recalibrated. I took freelance consulting jobs that required focus but not explanation, process reviews, workflow cleanups, temporary contracts that paid modestly and asked no questions. Each invoice I sent under my own name felt like a small act of reclamation. During the day, I worked. At night, I studied. I started with what I already had: old emails saved in forgotten folders, statements downloaded years earlier and never deleted, tax returns going back a decade. I printed everything and spread it across the floor, sorting by year, by account, by signature. This was familiar territory. Operations had taught me that systems reveal themselves when you map them patiently. I was not trying to prove I was right. I was trying to understand the architecture that had excluded me. Jonathan called occasionally. His tone was calm, almost gentle. He asked if I was settling in, if I needed anything. He told me the kids were fine. He told me not to stress. I answered politely, briefly. I did not argue. I did not accuse. Silence unsettles people who expect defense. Rachel called once, hesitant. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was learning something new every day. She sounded relieved, as if that fit better with the version of me she could understand. Evan texted short updates, neutral, observant. I sensed he was watching, even if he did not know what for. Weeks passed. My routine sharpened. One afternoon, while reviewing trust documents for the third time, I noticed a timestamp that did not align. A digital signature recorded on a day I was not even in the state. At first, I assumed I was mistaken. I checked my calendar, then my travel receipts, then the file metadata. The discrepancy stayed. That night, I slept poorly, not from fear, but from alertness, the feeling you get when a puzzle piece finally catches light. The next morning, I called Linda Carver. Her office was understated, tucked into a quiet building near downtown. No glass walls, no intimidating decor. She listened without interrupting as I explained my situation. She asked precise questions: dates, authorities, jurisdictions. When I mentioned the trust, her expression shifted slightly. Not surprise, interest. She said she would review the documents. She did not promise outcomes, she promised clarity. A week later, she introduced me to Michael Trent, a forensic accountant who spoke softly and took notes as if he were listening to music only he could hear. He did not dramatize findings, he measured them. They worked independently. That mattered to me. During that time, Jonathan stopped calling. The quiet stretched. I let it. One evening, Linda called. She said the timestamp anomaly mattered. Under Connecticut law, electronic authorization carried strict requirements: timing, presence, consent. If any part failed, the entire structure could be questioned. Michael confirmed that several transfers relied on that authorization. It was not a mistake. It was a vulnerability. I felt a calm settle over me, the kind that comes when uncertainty gives way to direction. This was not about revenge, it was about leverage, about understanding where the system bent. I asked Linda what this meant. She said it meant options. I asked Michael what he needed. He said patience. Jonathan sent an email a few days later, friendly. He asked if I was ready to come home. He said everything could go back to normal. I read the message twice. I did not respond. Normal was a system where my consent had been retroactively rewritten. Normal was no longer neutral. As winter settled in, I continued my work. I learned the language of fiduciary responsibility, the obligations that came with authority, the consequences when those obligations were breached. I read case law not for emotion, but for pattern. At night, I replayed conversations from years earlier. Phrases that had sounded supportive now revealed structure. The way decisions had been framed as care, the way my competence had been quietly reclassified as liability. One afternoon, while sorting receipts, I received a message from Rachel. She wrote that she had found emails on the family computer that did not match what her father had told her. She did not say more. She did not ask questions. She simply shared the fact. I thanked her. I told her to take care of herself. Trust was being renegotiated across generations. Linda and Michael met me again in early spring. They laid out the findings calmly. The trust authorization, the account consolidation, the use of family assets as collateral for obligations I had never approved. This was not a divorce issue. This was a fiduciary one. That distinction mattered. I did not rush. I did not confront Jonathan. I did not file anything yet. I chose to wait. Waiting is not passive when you know what you are waiting for. I could have challenged everything at once. I could have demanded access. I could have fought loudly. Instead, I let the structure remain intact long enough to reveal its weakest point. By the time Jonathan realized I was no longer confused, the narrative had already shifted. I had learned how it worked, and I knew where to apply pressure. If you have ever been told that silence means weakness, remember this. Silence is only empty when it has no direction. Mine did. Sometimes the quietest phase is where the real work begins. Chapter 4. Control is a legal illusion. The real work moved forward without announcements. It did not arrive with raised voices or dramatic gestures. It arrived through paperwork, through requests written carefully enough to sound routine. Linda filed the first motions quietly, requests for independent audits, notices sent to the trustees, formal letters to the logistics company asking for full financial disclosure. Everything followed procedure. Everything looked reasonable. Jonathan did not react at first. When he finally did, it was with mild amusement. He emailed me one evening asking if this was really necessary. He said lawyers made everything heavier than it needed to be. He said money was not worth damaging a family. I read the message without emotion. I did not reply. Michael began reviewing documents as they arrived: balance sheets, loan agreements, internal transfers. He worked methodically, marking pages with small notes that only he understood at first. Occasionally, he would look up and ask a question that cut straight through surface explanations. Rachel came to see me one weekend. She sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, scrolling through emails she had recovered from an old backup. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "He told me these were deleted because they were outdated," she said, "but the dates do not match." She handed me the screen. I did not react visibly. I told her she had done enough, that the rest was not hers to carry. Evan helped in quieter ways. He checked metadata. He verified timestamps. He never offered opinions. He simply provided accuracy. Jonathan continued performing control. He attended meetings. He spoke confidently to advisors. He told friends that everything was being handled, that I was just having a phase. The audit findings changed the temperature. Michael called me into his office one afternoon. He laid out the results calmly, without emphasis. Several accounts tied to the family trust had been used as collateral for personal investment obligations. Funds meant for shared security had been pledged without full disclosure. The paper trail was clean enough to avoid scandal, but not clean enough to survive scrutiny. There was also evidence of concealed expenditures, not extravagant, not careless, just enough to reveal intention. Linda reviewed the findings and nodded once. She said this shifted leverage. Jonathan was informed through official channels. He called me that night. He asked why I was doing this. He said he had always taken care of us. He said I was misinterpreting things that were complicated. I told him I was not misinterpreting anything. There was a pause on the line. Then his voice changed, less patient, more controlled. He said I was making this harder than it needed to be. I told him I was making it accurate. The trustees responded by limiting his authority pending review, temporary, procedural, but the effect was immediate, access restricted, decisions delayed, control fractured. Jonathan did not lose his reputation. Not yet. He lost momentum. Rachel called me after her father confronted her. She said he accused her of betraying him. She cried as she spoke, torn between loyalty and clarity. I told her that truth often feels like betrayal to people who rely on silence. As spring turned into summer, the audit expanded. More accounts, more linkages, patterns emerged. Michael mapped them carefully. Linda prepared filings that spoke only in facts. Jonathan attempted reconciliation. He suggested mediation. He offered partial concessions. He framed everything as compromise. I declined. The final blow did not come with a verdict. It came with a restriction order. Authority suspended until resolution. Control transferred temporarily to neutral oversight. Jonathan walked into the house one evening and stood in the doorway, hands empty. He looked smaller, not broken, just reduced. I did not feel victorious. I felt light. He asked what I wanted. I told him I wanted what was mine, nothing more. He nodded slowly, as if realizing that the language he had used for years no longer worked. When he left, the house felt quieter than it had ever had. Not empty, clear. I returned to my apartment that night and slept deeply for the first time in months. Control, I realized, had never been as solid as it looked. It depended on permission, on access, on belief. When those were withdrawn, what remained was process, and process does not take sides. Chapter 5. What he took, I left behind. What remained after the process was space. Space to decide without pressure, without someone else defining what winning was supposed to look like. By early 2025, the negotiations moved slowly, deliberately. Linda kept reminding me that patience was still part of the strategy. I listened. For the first time in years, I was not in a hurry to get anything back. Jonathan wanted resolution. He wanted final numbers, final terms, a clean end. He spoke about fairness, about closure, about moving on. His language had shifted from control to appeal. I reviewed the proposals quietly, line by line. I asked questions that surprised even my own attorneys, not because they were aggressive, but because they were precise. I did not ask how much I could get. I asked what I was legally entitled to, nothing more. When Linda looked up from the papers, she studied me for a moment. "You know you could push for more," she said. I told her I knew. What I wanted was not everything. What I wanted was independence that could not be negotiated away again. The settlement reflected that choice. I reclaimed assets that had been mine by right, accounts tied directly to my labor, investments made before the trust restructured my authority. The rest I left untouched, not as mercy, as boundary. Jonathan tried to understand that decision. He asked why I would walk away from money I could claim. I told him that money taken without control always comes with strings. He did not argue after that. He simply nodded, as if finally realizing that the conversation had ended somewhere he could not follow. The house in Connecticut was sold. Not dramatically, not bitterly, just efficiently. I walked through it one last time, touching nothing. The rooms no longer held authority over me. They were just rooms. Rachel met me for coffee a few weeks later. She looked older than she had the year before, not in age, but in awareness. She did not defend herself. She did not justify what she had believed. She said she was sorry. I told her that trust is learned through experience, not instruction, that she did not fail me, that systems teach people where to look. We talked about boundaries, about financial literacy, about the quiet ways power moves in families. It was not reconciliation in the sentimental sense, it was recalibration. Evan joined us later. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, he asked practical questions about contracts, about safeguards, about what to watch for. I realized then that something had shifted permanently, Not allegiance, awareness. My new apartment no longer felt temporary. I painted the walls. I bought furniture that fit only my needs. I signed a lease extension without consulting anyone. The act felt ordinary. That was the point. In late spring, I sat across from a representative at a small investment firm. No family name, no shared authority, just my signature, my decision. As I signed the documents, my hands did not hesitate, not because I was fearless, but because I was informed. That difference mattered. Walking out of the building, I felt lighter than I had in decades, not triumphant, grounded. Jonathan moved on. He rebuilt his routines. He kept his reputation. That was never my concern. I did not need him to fall to stand. What I learned through all of this was simple and not easy. Control that depends on silence is not strength. Trust that cannot survive clarity is not partnership. I did not win by taking everything back. I won by choosing what to carry forward. If you are listening to this and you recognize yourself in any part of it, hear this. You do not have to be loud to be powerful. You do not have to destroy to reclaim. Knowledge changes the shape of every conversation. Stay curious, stay aware, and if this story helped you see your own life more clearly, stay with this channel. There are more stories like this, told without noise, without fear, and without permission from anyone else.